This week on the agenda, food, water, geopolitics. As tensions in the Gulf continue to disrupt a critical global trade route, are we entering a new era of resource insecurity? Disruption in the Strait of Hormuz due to the conflict in Iran is once again exposing just how fragile global food systems are. From fertiliser shipments to water scarcity and rising production costs, the impact extends far beyond the Gulf. Energy shocks and geopolitical tensions combined with climate stress are feeding through global supply chains and pushing food security higher up the list of strategic priorities for governments around the world. Could food and water become the next geopolitical flashpoint? I'm joined by Ertharin Cousin, founder and CEO of Food Systems for the Future. Great to have you back on the agenda. Look, for years, food security was treated mainly as a development issue. Are we now entering an era where food, water and agricultural access are becoming instruments of geopolitical power in the same way that energy has been?
The short answer is yes. But let me just say, food is first and foremost a human necessity, of course, and access to food-producing inputs, the seeds, the water, the resilient supply chains to support the movement from farm gate to consumer are all critical infrastructure issues. They are being recognized more often now by governments, not just as the necessity that we described, but also as economic security issues and national security issues.
So who is supporting solutions? Which projects can you see around the world that are setting an example that maybe others should follow or pay more attention to?
I think that what we're seeing today is that the traditional actors in global trade, whether it's Brazil, which has extended its role in production and external trade flows of food and agricultural products. The United States, of course, has always been an actor that is a leader in supporting the international trade of agricultural products and goods. And now we are beginning to see countries even like Russia playing a more direct role. I think the Europeans have their own trading partners, so everyone plays a role in this. And what we should recognize is that no country's role is more important than another. What every country must share in the burden of ensuring that we have a productive and trade a productive trade system that is rules based. No country should suggest that they are not a part of the system when the system is so dependent. What happens in China or in other parts of Asia affect the food security of families in West Africa. And so the tendency to suggest I can have export bans in my country that because I'm a smaller country is a misnomer. Yeah. Every country has a responsibility to perform in a reasonable, rational manner to support the productivity and the efficiency of our global food trading system.
You are very much championing collaboration and partnerships, but if we look at what's happening in the world, it does seem that some countries are prioritising self-sufficiency and strategic resilience, in which case is there a danger that the global food system becomes even more fragmented?
Without a doubt, that risk exists, because the strategic resilience is critically important. But because if every country focuses on response by turning inward, thinking about their own domestic food security, the global system becomes more brittle. Export restrictions, we know this from previous high food price crisis, that export restrictions result in higher food prices in not just a particular region, but in the global food system. Stockpiling without coordination creates brittleness in the system and reduces the trust that can worsen worsen shortages and increase prices. The goal should not be isolation. It must be a recognition of coordination, collaboration, and cooperation. It should be, we build smart resilience when we take those factors into consideration. Yes, stronger domestic capacity is a part of the solution, but more diversified trade relationships, better regional as well as global cooperation, and systems that continue to function during crisis. That is what will support both domestic national food security as well as global food security.
Now, we often talk about oil choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. Vessels go through there carrying grains, all kinds of foodstuff, fertilizers as well, which are useful for farming. They also transport water. I've started to wonder if you think that water scarcity could become an equally serious source of geopolitical tension over the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Thank you for that question. It is so important. 70% of freshwater draws globally are consumed by the food and agriculture system. And so water scarcity is a serious source of stress in a number of regions across the globe. And it will become more important over the growing decades as our population continues to escalate. So agriculture depends on reliable water access. And climate variability is making rainfall and irrigation irrigation systems less predictable. Most agriculture across the globe continues to rely upon rainfall and not irrigation. So water tension does not always appear as the direct cause of conflict, but it can appear as a correlating factor because of reduced harvests, migration pressures because of reduced harvest and lack of access to nutritious food. The competition, when we talk about 70% of freshwater draws used in the food and agriculture system, that in and of itself sets up a competition between urban and rural areas where water is also needed for drinking and sanitation. And creates potential disputes both internally in countries as well as between countries, and particularly those countries that share groundwater access. So the challenge is to treat water security as part of the food security and climate adaptation and regional stability before the pressure becomes a crisis. This is a conversation where water security is an integral yet an integral and direct risk to global food security, And so we should not divide the two issues, but we should recognize the necessity for addressing the access to the water as well as to land.
Now, as you're talking about water, you talk about that tension between rural and urban communities. You said that there are also different priorities when it comes to internally, but also externally, which makes me think that when food prices rise like this, that there are political consequences that can be huge. Who and where do you think is most exposed if these pressures continue?
The most exposed are always the most vulnerable: low-income households, seniors, the infirm. And from a national standpoint, countries that depend heavily on imports of food and imports of fertilizer are also quite exposed to these potential risks. But when food prices rise, families who already spend a large amount of their income on food have very little room to adjust. And what we often see is that it is not the poorest that are most acutely affected during, whether it's a food security, an acute food security crisis or an acute water crisis. It is the working class, the middle class, that is accustomed to having the capacity to purchase or access the water and food that they require, that are the most they're most critically impacted by shortages, and they are also the most politically vocal when they are impacted, because what we see is that those who have a lack of access to these services over a longer period of time, the possibility of creating acute responses from those communities is far less than by those who are accustomed to having that access, and are much quicker to take to the streets to protest when that access disappears.
Let's broaden this out a bit to the international community rather than individual communities, because I wonder if you think there's a risk that this crisis widens the divide, not just between communities, but between countries who can afford resilience and those who simply can't.
Without a doubt, the potential for political division between, particularly when you think about the impact of the Strait of Hormuz and the ships that are getting through the strait, that many of them have a stronger relationship with Iran, and as a result, they have found themselves more able to transit the strait. Their ships able to transit the strait, including India and China. But those ships where the countries are seen as aligned more with the U.S. or the other Gulf states are facing more of a challenge in the movement of goods from the Strait of Hormuz. The global cooperation is essential. Because whether those ships get through or not, because of the flag on the ship, the countries that are wealthy can afford to manage the challenges of fertilizer price increases or energy price increases versus those countries that find themselves without those resources. And so though vulnerable countries begin to align in different ways because of the domestic challenges that this geopolitical issue is creating.
Look, Ertharin, for decades, the assumption has been that global markets would absorb shocks like this, smooth out all of the shortages. Has that model fundamentally changed?
The global markets and the market concept remains essential but we've learned that markets alone cannot absorb every shock, because political externalities will affect market behavior. So the markets work best when supply chains are functioning and information is trusting, and we are performing pursuant to a rules-based orders. Countries must avoid panic-driven restrictions, which often directly affects the market reliability. So when energy and fertilizer and climate and transport disruptions occur at the same time, markets can transmit volatility rather than reduce the volatility of the system. So the market system should definitely not be abandoned, but it does need to be strengthened. The recognition by global actors of domestic decision making at the impact on global market and global food security is a critical understanding that must be not only acknowledged, but we must perform pursuant to the realities that the global market requires in that cooperation and a functioning system.
Now, this disruption has gone on long enough to affect planting decisions, fertiliser access, and, as we've been discussing, shipping routes. What changes once countries start making longer-term decisions rather than waiting for the markets to stabilise?
What changes is what farmers plant, how much they plant, and those decisions based upon the realities of the challenges that they're facing have consequences beyond the decision in that particular country. We know that fertilizer, that crops planted that require nitrogen-based fertilizer or other chemical-based fertilizers that are because of cost, because of availability, when farmers use less, their harvests are less, which has a direct impact on what is available in the market and results in higher food prices. So we may not see the consequences of the decisions that farmers are making today on the shelves and markets tomorrow, but they will resonate in market prices in the latter part of 2026 and in 2027.
Ertharin Cousin, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Let's continue with our conversation about the impact of the conflict in Iran on global food security. With me now is the Chief Executive of the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, Maximo Torero. Thanks for coming on the agenda. Now, how vital is it that traffic in the Strait of Hormuz gets back to normal, or has the real damage already been done?
So the situation right now is in day 87, if I'm not wrong. We put as a bigger threshold the day 90 because it's when you touch basically all the crop calendars of the world. So what this means is that 1/4 to 1/3 of the inputs, the key inputs for agriculture, out of the market, and we are starting to see significant increases in costs. So no matter it opens today, we will have higher food prices because many decisions have been already made because of the crop calendar. And by the end of this year and next year, the question is how deep it will be, and that will depend on how much longer we keep the Strait of Hormuz closed.
How big an effect is this having, and when will we start to see that impact?
No, I think prices have increased substantially. Crude oil, 55%, natural gas, 60 to 85%, urea prices, 25 to 55%. We will also see increase in price of seeds. Freight costs, 43% increase, bunker fuel costs, 58%. So inputs have increased substantially. And we will see the impacts from next month onwards. We already are seeing that the corn price has increased 9%, soybeans 25%, wheat 8%, and rice 2 to 9%. 1 week ago, we didn't have those levels. So we will see commodity price increasing, and we will also start to see food inflation. And we are already seeing some food inflation, especially in Asia, where we are observing already inflation bigger than 4%. This will move to other regions of the world very soon in the next following months.
That's food prices, but what about the impact this is having on farmers? Where in the world are rising prices hitting farmers the hardest?
So it is hitting first in Asia, especially Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. It is starting to hit in Africa because of the crop calendar, Sudan, Kenya, and Somalia. It will hit also in Turkey, Jordan. All of these are import dependent of these inputs from this region, also Brazil and Thailand. The issue here is that we need to understand that these prices are global prices. These are commodity prices traded at the world level. Therefore, the impacts will be felt from east to west, south to north. It will be felt across the world. And also, you need to add to these energy prices, which we're already feeling. You have already increases in energy prices, which are significant. For example, in Latin America, 25% increase of Brent of diesel price. Europe, 23%, Asia, 27%, Africa, 16%. And this is also a crucial input for agri-food systems, not only for the logistical part, but also for the pumping of water for irrigation.
So you're mentioning all of these numbers, which seem to be getting bigger and bigger. It's quite jaw-dropping. Do you think that policymakers are perhaps underestimating the impact of prolonged food price inflation?
I think nobody expected that the duration will continue. That's why you see even in Europe and in many OECD countries, there were a lot of fiscal measures, like reduction of taxes to fuel, certain levels of subsidies or fixing prices, because they thought this was temporal. But now that it's taking more than 80 days, they are very concerned because this will create fiscal pressure to their economies. And we are seeing a supply shock. This is not a demand shock. Therefore, the only way to cope with it is to reduce consumption and to help the most vulnerable people through targeted programs.
We've got conflict, climate pressure, trade disruption. I mean, when do you think this stops being a temporary crisis and becomes the new structure of the global food system?
Yeah, this is an important question because we are saying now that once we reach day 90, which already we had basically, there is a shift, no? And the shift now is that we know that all crop calendars are affected. That means that we need to start doing a significant response to try to minimize the impacts. No longer expects that this will be reopened. And we have display measures in the short term, medium term, and long term to be able to cope and minimize the impacts of this crisis.
You talk about investment in alternatives. So it makes me think about what China's doing, spending years building strategic reserves, diversifying supplies and investing in food resilience. Do you think we're maybe now seeing a bit of a divide between countries that prepared for systems shocks, for systemic shocks, and those who didn't?
No, you are completely right. If you look at the energy mix in China, the change has been dramatic. And that's what is helping them enormously. Still, they need to do this transition also in the agri-food systems. Partially they have done it, but they are not yet fully there as they are in other sectors, like in cars, for example. But you don't see still in China electric tractors. You don't see still in China too many solar pumps, but that's something that we need to do. But relatively speaking, they have progressed enough and sufficiently to be comfortable right now. If you look at the situation currently, China is in a more comfortable situation than many other Asian countries in the world.
Countries are racing for water, for food security, for energy security, supply chain security, all of those things all at once. Does that drive for resilience risk making the global food system even more fragmented?
Look, as we have been saying for the last 3 or 4 years, the agri-food system is a sector that is operating under risk and uncertainties. Risks, you can find ways to cope with them and to put insurance. Uncertainties, you don't know. The wars and the conflict we have been seeing the last year, including COVID-19, we didn't know about them, they were uncertain. But the frequency and intensity of climate events, the scarcity of water, we know. So we can do better work on trying to increase resilience on those, and we can work on trying to find methods to be more efficient in the use of those.
I'm thinking about new methods and efficiencies. It's making me think about innovation, Maximo, because China's investing heavily in agricultural technology, alternative proteins, climate-resilient farming. Could this crisis we're seeing now maybe accelerate a new technological race in food production and maybe reshape global agricultural power?
Look, for sure, in every crisis, there is an opportunity. But there will be significant costs to this crisis. And that's what we want to minimize. On the opportunity side, yes, we are saying right now, any MDB, any IFI, a secure investment is to move and transform the agri-food system by improving the energy mix of the sector, like deploying electric pumps, electric tractors, electric drones. This is a huge return to the dollar invested because we know it will be a successful investment. Second, we know that we need to increase innovation to find alternatives, and especially not only for fertilizers like green ammonia or biofertilizers, where we need 2 to 3 years of investment, but also we need to do a lot of research on having seeds and varieties which are resistant to climate variability and climate intensity of shocks, because the next pests and diseases will come because of climate. The next transboundary diseases will come because of climate. So we need to be prepared for those, and we need to innovate on the technologies we have today so that we are ready. And we also need to support our biodiversity. Gene banks, the reason of a gene bank is because I have a different variety that I can use that could be more resistant to a shock that will affect. Okay, in the case of GMOs, of course, in soybeans, for example, if something happens to a soybean seed, it will replicate immediately. So we also need to keep investing and innovating to avoid that to happen, or to find alternatives and varieties that can be deployed very quickly to minimize the risk. So innovation will be central, but that does not mean that there won't be a significant cost to society of what is happening right now.
You have called for urgent, coordinated international action to address the looming food crisis that is happening because of what's going on in Iran. What does that coordinated urgent action look like?
I think this is a time for agencies to properly prioritize the interventions. What we are saying is that there are countries which are import-dependent of inputs and of food. Those countries normally are in debt distress or in very tight fiscal situations. This is the moment to deploy emergency facilities, like the one that was deployed in 2022, following the Food Import Financing Facility of FAO by the IMF, called the Food Shock-Driven Window, which allow to have access to support balance of payment gaps to countries that need it. Asian Development Bank has deployed one. We are working with the African Development Bank to deploy another one. I think those coordinations, so that we avoid duplication, are central. Second, we have learned a lot from the previous crises that blank subsidies to fertilizers will not work. They will be regressive, the money will be diluted very quickly, and will create corruption. What we need is targeted interventions. If we want to support farmers, let's use the systems that have electronic registries so that we can properly target the farmers that really need this and they cannot afford it, and for their own food security is required. Third, across the world, we need to coordinate to avoid export restrictions on fertilizer and energy products. And finally, we need to keep putting information in the market to avoid uncertainty. Just to give you an idea, a 1% increase of oil will imply 0.26% increase in the food import bill. The same 1%, if there is uncertainty, will be 0.67%, so 3 times more of the impact. So we need to reduce uncertainties, and that's very important to keep prices as low as possible today, because today we have enough food available and enough stocks. The problem is end of the year and the following year.
Maximo Torero, thank you very much.
A pleasure.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out @The Agenda Show on TikTok.
Coming up on a future agenda. A decade on from Brexit, should Britain stay the course or start the journey back to the EU? But for now, from me, Juliet Mann, and from all the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.